everyone. Welcome back to the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am Katey Rich. I'm the awards editor here at The Ankler. And today, my co-host is a freelance critic and writer who sees everything, talks to everybody, film and theater included, honestly. It's Esther Zuckerman.
Hi. Oh, wow. That was very...
I love the enthusiasm.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
So, Esther, I brought you here to talk about a whole bunch of really good, small summer movies that are coming out right now. And later on in this episode, you'll hear my conversation with the star of one of them, Julianne Nicholson, who is the titular Janet in Janet Planet. It's the directorial debut of Annie Baker, a very big deal in the New York theater world as a playwright. And with this one movie, she has put her name in the ranks of people like Yorgos Lanthimos and Jeff Nichols, who also happen to have major new movies out right now. It's summer. It's the season of Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine around the horizon. But we've got all of these like small, fascinating movies kind of coming all in a big rush. Honestly, Esther, before we get into some of these, why are all of them coming out all at one time? I know there's limited release. There's going to be a chance to see them all summer, but this seems kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, it definitely feels like the blockbusters sort of cleared the deck after Inside Out 2. Like the studios seem to know that Inside Out 2 was going to be this massive hit that maybe, prognosticators were still worried, but it definitely seems like studios were like, okay, let's take a break after Inside Out 2, let it ride out.
That's what they do. They just worry all the time that no one wants to see movies anymore, despite any evidence to the contrary.
Right. And so it seems like there was this lull, like this weekend is really sort of quiet in terms of the big summer blockbuster front, while everyone continues to go see Inside Out 2. I'm sure it'll have another huge weekend.
Yeah, we should say we're recording this before the weekend of June 21st. So, yes, I think that's a fair prediction to make, that Inside Out 2 will continue to do well.
Yeah, I think Inside Out 2 is going to have another huge weekend. I'm sure Bad Boys Ride or Die will continue to have a really good weekend. Like, everyone's doom and gloom seem to be very premature. And so it seems like with this quiet weekend, a lot of the, smaller distributors sort of jumped on it and said, okay, like, let's take this time and start sort of rolling out our smaller releases. Of course, it's interesting because that also involves Bikeriders and Kinds of Kindness, which aren't limited jumping into big releases. Those are just releases. So those are like...
Kinds of Kindness going wide? I thought it was limited.
Kinds of Kindness, I'm pretty sure, is going wide.
Okay, wow.
So, those are arms of bigger studios sort of using the lull to throw in some of their more adult titles and see if they stick. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And titles with big stars,
Yes.
You can, in theory, someone's being like, oh, a new Emma Stone movie. Oh, a new Austin Butler movie. And, maybe get something that's more interesting than what they bargained for in the middle of summer. But that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because then it's like, okay, the next week we've got Quiet Place, then it's Despicable Me 4. It's sort of like, we're
Don't
back.
Don't leave out Horizon, Esther. I'm still excited for Horizon.
I'm so sorry. I'll leave out you can't see my face. This is an audio only, so you can't see the face I just made having seen that film at Cannes. But
which I have not yet.
Yeah, so it does feel like, okay, the doom and gloom is over. We have a huge hit. Let's throw in some more interesting, smaller stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to start with Kinds of Kindness, which you also saw at Cannes, like Horizon. And as we're speaking, I think you just got off the phone with Emma Stone for a story you're writing about
that
it.
Will definitely be out by the time this is up, or hopefully will be out. I'm doing sort of for GQ, sort of oral history of Yorgos through his collaborators. And it's been really fun sort of digging into his process and how, he leaves his actors in the dark as to what it all means. The same way sometimes he leaves his audience, which is fun.
Yeah. And it sounds like Kinds of Kindness is certainly more of a leave them in the dark kind of thing than Poor Things, which to call Poor Things like mainstream and accessible is a little bit of a misnomer. But totally. It was a story that was easy to wrap your head around. It won a bunch of Oscars. It made some money. And here comes Kinds of Kindness, which I think for people who have been following his career since Dogtooth, has been a lot of it's back to Dogtooth, Yorgos. Is that more or less the vibe?
100%. It's funny because coming out of Poor Things, I saw it, I guess, before the New York Film Festival, after people had seen it in Venice. And I was like, this is the happiest movie he's ever made.
Mm-hmm.
It ends on this like super positive note for all of the sort of weirdness that people are talking about. Like, yeah, she has the brain of her unborn child and there's a lot of sex, but it's also just sort of like a straightforward, you know, Bella Baxter ends up on top at the end.
Yep.
She sort of gets to say fuck you to all of her
all the
enemies,
haters.
all the haters. And, you know, leaves you out on this high. And most of his movies have absolutely not done that.
Yeah.
Most of them leave you on this very depressing, very disturbing, very upsetting note. And Kinds of Kindness has 3 of those because it is a triptych. The Favorite and Poor Things, which were his most Oscar-friendly movies, were written by Tony McNamara, the British writer sort of behind The Great, too. And this, he's returning to working with Ephemius Philippou, and pardon me if I mispronounce that, but that is the co-writer who also wrote Dogtooth and Alps and The Lobster and Killing of the Sacred Deer with him. So it's much more in the vein of his earlier stuff. And it tells these 3 stories essentially about like each one sort of about lonely people searching for any sort of recognition from the people around them. Whether that be like in the first story where Jesse Plemons is the first 2 stories, actually Jesse Plemons is very much the lead. And in the first story, he plays a man who's a subordinate of Willem Dafoe's character who, without spoiling too much, asks him to do a very violent thing to appease him, and he balks at it and then sort of spirals because he's lost this one person that all he wants from is like his life.
Good afternoon, Robert. Don't just stand there, sit down. Were you waiting long?
No, 15 minutes or so.
Your hair's nice like that. Don't get it cut. Let it grow a little longer. And you've lost more weight, I think. Skinny men are the most ridiculous thing there is. We've gone over this before. You must put on a few pounds. I told you that last time.
But I have.
You most certainly have not. You're even skinnier now. We'll have to take another look at your eating plan for the week.
In the second one, Plemons plays a man who's devastated because his wife, played by Emma Stone, is missing at sea. And when she returns, he starts to suspect that she's not the same person. And she sort of starts doing everything in her power to convince him as such. And in the third, they play 2 people working for a cult run by Willem Dafoe and Hong Chow. And Emma Stone's character has this like complete devotion to them, but sneaks away to visit the child that she left behind. And, you know, so it's all of these stories about people sort of seeking approval, sort of seeking meaning in their lives through other people and how dark they're willing to go for the approval.
And maybe not necessarily finding the meaning that they're looking for.
Yes.
So honestly, no spoilers. So Jesse Plemons wins the Best Actor award at Cannes for this, which made him and Kirsten Dunst officially Cannes-winning couple, which we all celebrate. But I feel like from the moment it happened, you know, Cannes is a major Oscar precursor these days, as we all know. But winning that for an anthology film that's this dark kind of felt very different from, you know, Anora winning the Palme d'Or, for example. Like, is that the? I mean, I'm so excited for Jesse Plemons. I'm so excited to see this. It feels like that should be enough, and that like putting Oscar pressure on this maybe does the performance in the movie a disservice.
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, I think this is sort of Yorgos saying like, nah, I don't need this kind of approval. Like,
stay away from me, Oscar voters.
Yeah. You know, I don't need this. It was really exciting that Jesse won because he's incredible in the film. And it's really exciting to see Yorgos working with Jesse Plemons. And I think actor predictions feel a little harder out of Cannes than Palme d'Or predictions.
Yeah.
They tend to be not as much of a prognosticator as the Palme d'Or for sort of like an Oscar player.
Yeah, I mean, last year, Anatomy of a Fall wins on Palme d'Or. Like, everyone comes out of Cannes talking about Sandra Hüller, and that is sort of interest, but Best Actress goes to the actress from About Dry Grasses. You know, they spread the wealth, which I think is a totally reasonable thing for a jury to do.
Yeah, and I also believe, like, that is intentional. Like, they don't share those prizes. Like, you can't win one and win the other, you know? Yeah. It is a process sort of, it's always funny at the award ceremony, you sort of figure out who's winning what by process of elimination. Mikey Madison from Anora probably has a better chance of being a major player in the Oscar race, even though that's a small, than, like, Jesse Plemons, even though she's a smaller actor, just because like it's sort of the Sandra Hüller thing. Like Honora was such a success, and a lot of that was centered around her performance.
Yeah, and anthologies in general. Like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs looms large is the movie that got 2 Oscar nominations. Nobody thought was going to happen, but not for acting.
Yeah.
Like, that is just a really tough hill to climb. That's not how Oscar narratives are built. You can't do a campaign around like playing those characters. And like I think it could happen someday, but it does feel like. And again, it is completely fine for it to be a barrier to an Oscar nomination for this performance in particular, but it does feel like a big barrier.
Yeah, and it's also interesting. I mean, like the first 2 stories are very much centered around Jesse and are very much a showcase for him. The third story is way more centered around Emma. So it feels like, so it's interesting because it does feel like by the end of the movie, you're sort of like away from him a little bit because the third story is less focused on him.
Yeah. Do you think that people are going to like this movie if they go see it, or is it going to turn a lot of people off?
I mean, I don't know. I think it is going to turn a lot of people off. I really liked it. I really dug it. For example, my parents are going to see it and they were like, well, we've loved everything that they've done. We've loved, you know, the Poor Things and The Favorite and even The Lobster. And I was like, yeah, this one is like tougher than even like The Lobster, you know, in terms of how it sits. So I was trying to be like, hey guys, like watch Dogtooth before you go see it.
Prepare
That's a way better like or Killing of a Sacred Deer. That's a way better approximation of like what you're gonna get out of this one.
I have a similar question about the Bikeriders, which is also opening wide, and is also in many ways not necessarily the movie people think they're going to see. It stars Austin Butler and kind of like 50s leather, where you're like, okay, star of Elvis, and Tom Hardy is there doing an accent, which I guess is what he does these days. It's about a motorcycle gang. Like I think it's fair to compare it to Goodfellas, and I don't mean that to kind of make it seem paler in comparison, because everything is paler in comparison to Goodfellas, but it has that like rise and fall of a club, and you know, you can kind of go into it feeling like you're going to like have a good time with this like adventure of guys. And it's not necessarily not that, but I think, you know, Jeff Nichols, who has made kind of moody, thoughtful movies like Loving or Take Shelter, is doing something a little bit different here. And also in some ways, Jodie Comer, who is playing the wife of Austin Butler's character, is really the star of it. Yeah. I really like the Bikeriders. I didn't see it until recently, but I remember it vividly from being at Telluride last year. And it was being released by 20th Century at the time, which was always kind of a weird fit. And people saw it and then kind of immediately were like, oh, sure, that was fine. And then it gets dropped by 20th Century and picked up by Focus. And so it kind of comes in with this idea of this like kicked around little unloved toy, which makes me really want to support it because I do think people would like it. But I don't know. Do you feel like that's a fair perception of how the Bikeriders has gotten to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as big a fan of the Bikeriders as you are. I think there's a lot to like in it. I think Jodie Comer is amazing and the performances are really great. It is this sort of like, holy shit, like look at Austin Butler on screen type of moment.
I mean, literally her character is being like, look at him. And you're like, okay, I will.
Yeah. But I do think it has a lot of structural problems. For me, the structure didn't work because it's based on this book of photographs by Danny Lyons. And the way that he structured it is sort of structure upon structure. He has this Mike Face character who's essentially playing the photographer character, interviewing Jodie Comer's character. And so there are layers upon layers of distance from these guys in the screenplay, which I think is interesting, but I just don't think it's executed very well because I think as much as we love Mike Feist, like Challenger's Hive, Arise, that character feels really unnecessary.
It's not really a character. He's there as kind of a vehicle. Yeah.
Again, like Jodie Comer's character she's so great in it. But she also sort of flits in and out in a way that is a bit frustrating. And the Butler character is, you know, this moody guy that never shows his emotions, which is always a tough thing to depict on screen, that you never really feel the emotional pull of either of them. So I sort of get like why it had this mixed reception at Telluride.
I mean, you need real and critical enthusiasm for something like this to be a summer release and kind of push all the way through to awards. Like we had Barbie and Oppenheimer last summer. We remember that well. But like, you know, spring releases, like I'm going back to Grand Budapest Hotel. I know there's a more recent example, but that's the one that's on my brain. But I do think that, and I think it's fair. I am a fan of the Bikeriders, but I do think that kind of reaction is fair, that it's like, it's an experiment. They're like trying to like mess with the structure and make it kind of about memory of these people more than the people themselves. It doesn't have that big emotional hook to it. And like Jodie Comer has been really great in stuff like The Last Duel that also isn't necessarily going to like get her the awards attention she deserves. I think she's like really phenomenal in this movie. And, you know, I know she won a Tony last year, so people who've seen that kind of know what she can do. She won an Emmy for Killing Eve. Yes, she won an Emmy for Killing Eve. So she's kind of like known as a quantity, but I want this to be maybe like a smaller star-making performance. Like, it's not going to launch her. I would like the Bikeriders to do decently well. I don't think it's something where, like, you know, this is going to be another wide release weekend where it's like, oh, the newest movie made $10 million max. But, like, I think that's okay. Like, the Bikeriders is a small movie. It deserves to be treated that way.
I mean, no one's expecting it to beat Inside Out 2.
That would be weird, very weird.
I do think, like, the movie's biggest hope in terms of awards is, you know, depending on how this year shakes out, that Jodie could sneak in to some of the races.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm sitting here with a critical ballot, like, at this point, I'd put her right in my supporting actress category, which, I don't know, would you call that fraud? I think she's a supporting actress,
No,
right?
I think she's definitely a supporting actor.
Even though she's kind of the voice of the movie.
Yeah, but she's still off to the side for most of it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back to supporting actresses and Janet Planet and then Julianne Nicholson. But before kind of wrapping on Janet Planet, there's a bunch of other small titles out there, most of which I have not seen. I was going to say I saw this TV Glow is still in theaters and really does feel like one of the breakthrough critical hits of the early summer. So people should still see that. But Esther, as someone who sees way more movies than I do, what's some of the other smaller stuff that is worthy of attention?
Yeah, I mean, there is Green Border, which is the Agnieszka Holland film about refugees, which was at the fall festivals last year. And
Stone Cold Bummer, I'm told.
Yes. Yeah. You know, you've also got Fancy Dance, which stars Lily Gladstone, and it was at Sundance like a while ago and sort of got picked up by Apple. And it's interesting because last year during her awards run for Killers of the Flower Moon, she was always bringing attention back to this film and the smaller films she does. There's Thelma, which I did go to high school with Josh Margolin, the director of it. So
not
shout
June
out.
Squibb, the star.
Not June Squibb, the star. I did not go to high school with 94-year-old June Squibb. But which is a very cute movie about a grandmother who gets scammed and then sort of takes her revenge on her own on a motorized scooter.
That one looks like we're talking about the Bikeriders and Kinds of Kindness as movies you don't necessarily tell everyone to see. Thelma feels like the one where it's like, yeah, you got 2 hours, go.
Oh, yeah. Tell your parents. Like, they'll have a great time. Like, everyone will be charmed. There's this recurring bit where she keeps running into other older people and they keep thinking they know each other from somewhere and having conversations past one another. That's very funny.
But maybe before any of these we've talked about, people should run, not walk to see Janet Planet, which was a big festival hit last fall. I think it was at Telluride and the New York Film Festival.
It was at Telluride at New York, yeah.
Yeah, and so I missed it in both places, so I only got to see it very recently. But for New York theater people, knowing that Annie Baker had made a movie made it an automatic event. As you are a New York theater person, I mean, Annie Baker is a playwright. She wasn't a director. It's not the kind of thing that automatically is going to be a great movie necessarily, but there was something about her work, right, that made everyone pretty confident that she would have what it takes.
I mean, she has an appreciation of cinema. I mean, her Pulitzer Prize winning play is called The Flick, and it takes place in a movie theater. And her work is very cinematic in a way. Even though she's not always directing it herself, it's very observational. She finds sort of even on stage these moments in like long silence and people just doing things, which I think is theater turned film, you know, that often gets like, oh, it's just talky, dialogue. And like her work is really not that. So it really makes sense that she would be someone who would translate well to cinema. And I saw Janet Planet pretty early before any of the festivals last year and was just like completely blown away. It is one of my favorite. It is probably at the top of my list for favorite movies of the year. It's a mother-daughter story. Janet is played by Julianne Nicholson. Her daughter, Lacey, is played by this Discovery Zoe Ziegler, who's incredible and is very natural. And Lacey is very attached to her mother, but it's told through these 3 different relationships that her mother has. 2 with sort of boyfriends and 1 with sort of an old friend played by Sophia Okonedo that re-enters her life. And the sort of jealousy of her daughter in sort of people drawing her mother away from her. It takes place in the 90s in Western Massachusetts, in, sort of a hippie, crunchy granola community, which is
semi-autobiographical for Annie Baker.
It is semi-autobiographical. She grew up there. Actually, interestingly enough, Julianne Nicholson grew up there, which maybe you touched on in your interview.
About that. Yep.
And who I think is so phenomenal, and one of these actresses that has been around for so long, doing such incredible work. And, she won the Emmy for Mayor of Easttown in her supporting role, so great on Boardwalk Empire, but she's also been really great in film. This film Monos that she did is really incredible.
Which apparently is why Annie Baker cast her. She went out into the jungle with a bunch of kids and made a movie.
Yeah, and that movie is wild and really incredible. And I love her so much as an actor, and this movie is so perfectly suited to her sort of again, sort of earthy, very naturalistic tendencies.
Yeah, it's a small movie, but it's so not delicate because it's about feelings, it's about women, it's about a child, and you can kind of imagine all the directions they can go. But the feelings, and I think you use the word earthy, it all feels so grounded and big, and what this girl Lacey is feeling about her mom and about getting older in some ways and about her possessiveness of her mother is so it's the entire world, it's the planet, right?
Yeah,
and it takes it all so seriously, and it makes you feel the gravity of the entire thing through the whole movie.
There's this mysticism element to it too, which is there's this sequence where they go see this production outdoors, which Sofia Ganeto's character is performing in, and it's so magical, but grounded in this reality. And yeah, it doesn't feel like a small movie at all. It feels really big and beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I assume that people who were not adolescent girls in the early to mid 90s can relate to this movie. But just the extreme recognition I felt on so many of those cultural signifiers in this, it was intense. It's amazing to see something like that feel so ripped from some deep part of your brain that you didn't know was there.
I mean, my favorite thing is the way Lacey has this little shrine of toys that she they're little figurines, and she goes and collects little grass and gives them to them. She gives them little offerings, and it's so perfectly rendered. I have been this kid. And I think this movie does such a perfect job of capturing that feeling of being that age in such a strong way.
Yeah, being 11 is really, it's a wild time to be alive.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're going to talk to Julianne Nicholson in a minute, and just the way that it films her as this kind of goddess figure, but kind of captures her as a real person throughout, her daughter looks up to her so much, she looms in so many ways over it, the attention to details on her, but you kind of watch her in these scenes with the other adult characters, messing up and not knowing what she's doing with herself. And you see that reflected back in her relationship with her daughter. That's a really complicated thing. And something about motherhood specifically that just doesn't ever show up on screen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
So Janet Planet, it's an A24 release. It's coming out super limited. I mean, I imagine in A24 style, it will be a little hard to find throughout the summer, depending on where you are. But we'll play for a long time, so you'll have a chance to see it.
Yeah, and it feels in terms of awards, it's definitely going to clean up, the first film awards at, critics.
It's true.
I can't imagine it not. And so it'll be interesting to see, especially with, what else A24 has, which is sort of an interesting slate this year, how it fares in the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Independent Spirit Awards are just clearing some spots at the tables for the Janet Planet crew to come in there.
For sure.
Well, Esther, thank you so much for this guide to a lot of really good movies. I think anyone saying that the strikes have meant that the deck is cleared and there's nothing good to see is just got to think it through. And go see some movies.
Go see some movies that aren't blockbusters.
Yeah, I mean, Inside Out 2, we support, but
we support Inside Out 2.
And then there was a trailer for Thelma before my screening of Inside Out 2, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's it. And June Squibb is a voice in Inside Out 2, so it all...
Yeah, it all connects, and maybe, they're getting the parents in.
Exactly.
Hey, we'll love this.
All right, thank you for being here, Esther.
Thank you, Katey.
So So now, after all that Janet Planet discussion, let's hear my conversation with Julianne Nicholson. As we said, she won an Emmy a few years ago for Mayor of Easttown, so I think she's become more recognizable to audiences, and she'll show up in a movie and you think, oh, wow, I cannot wait to see what she's about to do. Last year, she played a pair of very different moms. She was Marilyn Monroe's mom in Blonde, and then Nicolas Cage's very confused wife in Dream Scenario. And in Janet Planet, she is kind of this like big metaphorical definition of mom, while also, as Esther and I were saying, a really complicated human unto herself. Let's hear her talk about making Janet Planet, the nostalgic power of filming in Western Massachusetts, a part of the world she was already very familiar with, and then how she and Zoe Ziegler really built that on-screen mother-daughter bond. Hear it all in my conversation with the star of Janet Planet, Julianne Nicholson. So, Julianne, Annie Baker had said that you were not quite a friend of hers, but an acquaintance kind of from New York theater world. Like, what did that mean exactly? What level of acquaintance are we talking before you guys started on this?
Very removed.
Okay.
I had done one little play off Broadway a long time ago, but then I did a play at Playwrights Horizons called This by Melissa James Gibson, directed by Daniel Alkin. And at the same time that was at Playwrights, Circle Mirror Transformation was at Playwrights. Mm-hmm. And both productions were really well received. And so it was like a very sort of high moment over there. And so I saw Circle Mirror and met Annie then. I was a huge fan of hers because after Circle Mirror, I basically would go to see anything that she put on.
When you have an acquaintance like that in the theater world, does it feel any different than in Hollywood? Because like theater feels like it's always hanging on by a thread. When like a voice like Annie Baker comes out, people get so excited. Is that relationship any different in the theater world?
Maybe just because feels like a smaller community. She's such a particular voice, which now I feel that translating to Hollywood and the film world, because she's such an original. So, I mean, I didn't think I would have ever crossed her mind in the last 10 years. So it was like a joy to discover that, she was still sort of watching or paying attention, or that she wanted to work with me was a real thrill.
Yeah. I mean, she said it was the film Manos that really made her think that you were right for this. Like, is that something she said to you in the beginning? Is that a film you ever made thinking that it would get you another job?
No, well, no, and no. And I don't think she did say that to me. She plays her cards very close to her chest also. And so it's like, it's been a gradual, beautiful, like getting to know each other process. Because we spoke for the year pretty regularly for the year leading up to Janet. And then of course, while we were filming and now since then, no, but I feel like when I choose jobs, and now having done it for so long, you never know what people are going to see or what people are going to respond to, or what someone will see in a particular performance that will make them think of you somewhere else. So the best thing to do is just try to do work that I relate to, that I would want to see, that I feel like an instinctive draw to, and hopefully that translates.
Do people often tell you what you did that made them think of you for something? Is that something they try to keep away from you?
Sometimes some people do, some people don't. I don't think it's something they're trying to keep away, but it's very funny. It's very funny to me. Like what people know you from is because you just never know. So I feel like.
I mean, when you were talking about choosing roles, which I think a lot of times actors say like, oh, you can't choose. And obviously, when you have a long-standing career, there's a lot of times you can't choose. But it sounds like you do have some element of choice. And choosing to make a film like this, with a director who's never made something before, that's a really active decision that you made.
Yes.
So how much are you choosing these days? And how much was it an active choice to make Janet Planet?
Well, so I feel like I had a manager very early on in my career who encouraged the use of no when you could. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to feel good about the work that you're doing, good about the work you're putting out into the world. And so, if you have the luxury of being able to say no to a job that you don't necessarily feel like you want to do or that you don't love, then do that, and something else will come along. I feel like I've had a choice. Not always. I've definitely worked because it's also my job or whatever. It's ticked these boxes, but not those. I was such a huge fan of Annie's. I just think she's so brilliant. I just think that, and for a movie to be successful, it doesn't mean like it's not about how many eyes get on it. It's about like the final product. And I knew that whatever it was going to be, it's going to be an experience and something deep and meaningful, even if it's meaningful for like 4 people. So we protected that movie. I found out, I met Annie the summer before we filmed, and it was basically to, my agents and manager, it was like, okay, it's next year. But that's the thing we have to protect. So
I see, to schedule around it, make sure. Yeah.
So I had to make decisions that maybe practically would have been different, or but it was like, this is number one, and everything else, if it can work around that, great, and if not, then I don't do that thing.
Yeah. How often do you not get to do things for really boring scheduling reasons that like no one would ever know?
I would say not. Doesn't happen to me very regularly.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Every now and again, but now I've been doing enough that's like, okay, so it's not that one, it'll be something else. Like I trust I trust that you just can't get too attached until you can do something. Yeah, and even then, it's like not until you show up on set that you can even know for sure if it's going to happen or not.
And you don't linger too much on the things that didn't happen, because the next wave's gonna
something else will come. Yeah.
So Janet Planet is so specifically tied to this part of the world that's happening in, which is a part of the world that you, in Western Massachusetts, that you have that personal connection to, which I think from what Annie has said was like one of the many things that kind of made you feel right for this. So if you just don't mind telling me, what is that personal connection?
Yeah. The film takes place in Western Massachusetts. And basically, I moved there when I was 7. From outside of Boston, I moved to this little cabin in the woods with no electricity or running water with my sister and my mom. And we moved in with who was to become my stepfather. So I just was basically plopped from, a suburb of Boston into this community. My mom was an herbalist, and there was a real sort of alternative, was what it would have been called at the time, a community of people looking sort of outside of Western medicine or the more traditional ways of life, like living off the grid or being a vegetarian, like all these things that are now regular parts of our society, our world. It was like no big deal, was at the time like conscious choices to sort of follow these lifestyles. So it was very, very familiar to me.
Is that a world that had ever pulled you back before you made this movie? Had you ever been like, oh, we could just go live in the mountains or something?
Well, yes, not exactly like that. Though I did find myself my family and I, my husband and kids, we found ourselves moving from Manhattan to Topanga, Canyon, California. And so that did feel like a full circle moment to me, because when I was 18, I moved to New York because I was like not interested in that lifestyle. I was like, get me to the city, get me to 2 a.m. Chinese food or like delis or everything that went along with living in the city. And so when I moved to Topanga, California, it did feel like, here I am. What is it? The faster you run away, the quicker you return, or whatever that expression is. So I had that moment then for sure.
So then what was the homecoming feeling being on the set of this movie? Like what, were there specific things that you had forgotten that all of a sudden were there again?
It was almost like nothing was forgotten. And that was like, that was the sort of beauty, and the connection was, I had so many memories of that time, even though I hadn't been back in like 30 years. But I mean, the mall that we filmed at, I used to go roller skating at. We would go do our back to school shopping at that JCPenney. Like, I brought my kids to these swimming holes that I used to go to. And we drove up the street that I lived on, which, used to feel like a mountain to have to walk up. And then I realized it was just sort of like an incline, as an adult. It all actually felt like a homecoming, like just returning to a familiar place. It didn't feel like digging up memories. I was like stunned every day by how right it actually felt to be back there.
So you had your kids with you while you're making this, and like, you're playing a mom here. You've had like a mom streak, I think, recently. And I mean, I guess that's an impossible question to answer because you've been a mom for so long, but when you're working with Zoe Ziegler, you're building that mother and daughter relationship. Like, are you kind of inevitably drawing from your real life when you're doing that?
Definitely. And I also feel like it's very important for me when I'm someone's mom, to connect with their parents beforehand, to reach out and to start a dialogue. It doesn't just happen on the day. Like, what is Zoe like? I like to send presents. I like to bring things. We played Uno. Zoe had never played Uno. So we just played round after round after round of Uno. For me, with kids, it's very important to have a relationship off screen so that they feel comfortable on screen.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that kind of like thrums between the two of you. Like there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of scenes where you can tell what's going on, but so much of what this movie is about is what you understand when you're a kid and what, how your mom seems. There's so much of that silence.
Yeah.
I've always had this knowledge that I could make any man fall in love with me if I really tried. And I think maybe it's ruined my life.
Can you stop?
Stop what?
Stop trying.
I feel like in this case in particular, like Zoe is incredibly comfortable in silence. Or maybe she's not comfortable. I don't know, but she's not trying to fill it.
Yeah.
And so really it was just like she'd never done it before, but she's actually a pretty confident actor in that she's not forcing anything. She's not coming with, at least from what I could gather, she's not coming with preconceived ideas about what she's supposed to do or what's supposed to happen. I mean, she just like showed up every day and knew her lines and had some sort of inner understanding of who Lacey was.
Yeah.
It was really kind of remarkable.
Annie has said that she was really exacting with directing you guys in terms of like body movement and where you are, which is kind of surprising to hear when you're watching it because, there's just shots that feel kind of captured from real life. But just what was that like from your perspective of that? Was that a different style of directing than you were used to?
She's probably said that in an interview and it's come off stronger than she meant it. I think it was sometimes that was the case, but there was also, as I've said, like spoken word was like, to the punctuation.
Sure.
There was no like improvisation or like freedom or making it our own or anything like that. That was very much like Annie's work. But actually there was a lot of freedom and encouragement in terms of, some scenes you had to sort of follow, like when we're doing the prostrations, like walking through the forest. But then a lot of it is sort of setting the scene and then seeing what happens, I would say. So it didn't feel... It didn't feel too structured in terms of like where she needed us to be in the scenes. I would.
What's an example of us setting the scene and seeing what happens? Is there like a scene we can see that in?
Well, right now I'm thinking about like the various dinner table scenes. Mm-hmm. Like that's quite literal, but like she's setting this. So we're here, the table is sat, we're all having dinner, and now these are the words we're going to say, but. Do it in your own time or, you can lean over and touch someone's hand or you can sort of lean in or lean back or touch someone's toe under the table. Mm-hmm. So there's ways that you can sort of keep it alive or make it different. And that's what's fun to me, like those discoveries. Like, I don't like it when it's the same every time, but to sort of find moments of life while we're saying the same words every time.
Were there no mosquitoes out there on that deck? I was thinking about that.
Do you know what? There were some, but it wasn't that bad.
That's amazing.
I know. At least, but also like most mosquitoes don't like me.
Oh,
so I know.
You shouldn't brag about that too much. People don't like
No, I know. My son and husband get murdered by mosquitoes. It's really bad, but I'm pretty lucky.
Well, but the house itself like had like weird AC. Like it was like a very like authentic
house.
It
had no AC. They had to bring in something, and it was like 95 degrees. It was so hot in there. But I kind of love that. It's like the city in the summer. Like it just informs the pace. It just informs how people sit in their bodies. Like it's just, I find that like a perk, even discomfort. Like
there's something about like sitting in the chair and moving as little as possible. Like I feel like there's a couple scenes of that where you just sense that heat kind of sitting on them.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I was so glad I saw this movie in the summer. Like I know it was at festivals in the fall, and I feel like it would have been so depressing to be like, oh no, those dusks are gone for 6 more months. It's such an evocative summer movie. I'm sure it felt like that making it, but then seeing it, it must have come on a whole new level.
Yeah. I agree. I hadn't thought about that, but it sure was. It felt that way making it. It was like just felt like summer.
I mean, when you saw the film itself, like did you learn things about it that you couldn't see from that? It's such a precise movie while feeling so natural, and it makes me especially curious about what it's like to see it after being in it.
There were moments that sort of surprised me, but I felt like Annie captured like what we were making. I felt like the thing that we felt like we were making is what we see on the screen.
Does that usually happen for you? That it like what the final product is what you expected?
Not like this. No.
Yeah.
Not like
so
this.
So this was more feeling like it really captured it than...
Yes.
Okay.
Though that said, like not in any literal way, but I felt like the spell, for me, the spell that was cast while we were filming it felt like what I then watched. I feel like this movie cast a spell in the making it and what was and what it has become. But so it's hard to sort of like pinpoint what that is. Though also it's hard, I am less and less likely to watch stuff that I'm in now. I feel like, but this one I wanted to watch, and I felt like I could watch it as an audience member and not as like the actor in it, and that was
and it worked.
That was fun. Yeah.
Did that spellcasting feel linked to theater in any way? I feel like we talk about that with plays more than with movies.
Maybe it was the language of it that did that. Snuck up on us.
And did it have that feeling of like, you know, when you're talking about the dinner table scene and where you get to discover the moment in it, that feels to me like theater rehearsal. Like there's some elements of that's carrying over in terms of how you're building this.
Yeah. I think, but for me, that happens in film stuff too. Like you learn each time you do a scene, if you live in inhabit in a different way, then you're like taught about the character, taught about the relationships. But I do think the language of this film set us on our course.
Yeah. So wait, so you're saying you're watching your own work less and less. Is that just happening like as you get older, as you get more comfortable with what you've done? What's that change been like?
I would say it's both of those things. I just find like for me, it's the experience of doing it is just now much more fulfilling than whatever I see. I know some people craft a performance by seeing like, watching dailies, and I can see the value in that also. But who knows? Maybe that would be helpful for me. But it's really hard.
Yeah.
I just did a show for the BBC. I had to have an English accent, and that was like a whole other level of nails on a chalkboard. It's like a nightmare. Like,
wasn't your husband English? Is that
he
like
is,
it's too close that you can't?
I don't know. It's like when you hear yourself on tape for the first time, right? And you're just like, "What? That's not," because how you sound in your own head is so different from what you then hear on a recording.
I've realized after recording a podcast for this long, I've sort of gotten used to my own voice, and I don't know if that's healthy or not. Like, they are starting to match up, and something's going to change it eventually.
Right.
Do you have interest in your kids seeing your old stuff or anything that you do?
Well, they're going to come tonight, actually.
Oh, that's
and this
exciting.
This is the first time they've ever been to a premiere of mine, because a lot of this stuff is, I know I'm really excited because they were there when we filmed it, and because they know Annie, and
well, sure, you don't want them to see Blonde. Like I can see them
exactly. Well, so much of what I've done has been like nothing I want them to see.
Yeah.
And then like the one or two things that I would have wanted them to see, it just didn't work out. So I'm really excited to have this experience with them tonight.
No, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be cute. I just, to share so much of this work takes me away from my family, and it feels separate, even though I hold them close. Like, so the more I can sort of share with them or bring them in, that feels good to me.
That does it for this week's show. It is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Esther Zuckerman. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribing. And subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next week.